Clap it up if you want us to start right now.
Don's busy man. He wants us to get going.
Woo! All
And
right.
Aaron's like, I'm not doing overtime. Please, let's keep going. Let's do this. Okay, cool. Let's get going, shall we, guys? Yeah, we've got about 60 people signed up for this. I'm sure people are just stuck in traffic, trying to get back to their laptops, trying not to look at their phones while they're in their cars. I will let them off for that. It's better to be safe than sorry, obviously. But thank you all for being here on time and available for us. And welcome to Roomkey as a platform. I'll stop doing what I usually do at each event, which is introducing the platform itself, because for obvious reasons, we have Don here who can do that a lot better than I will. However, I'll welcome you to the company and the format of the event for the start of this before I do pass over to Don to tell you a bit more about what Roomkey is and does. Welcome to Think Different. Think Different is an event series run in collaboration between Dffrnt, the company I run, and Roomkey, which of course you're all part of right now. Dffrnt is a company that provides business benefits by subscription to creators. We're just trying to make sure that the acceleration experience is accessible for anyone, anywhere that needs it. I think it's pretty crazy that we have to put in applications to tons of programs before we even get accepted for support. Dffrnt's here to democratize that. The reason we're running this event series and this program of events is because business events are generally really boring, and that's crazy, right? Like during the whole lockdown pandemic series, we've ended up with Zoom conferences coming out of our ears, and we're just sat there bored, kind of half on our phone, listening to people just ramble away like I'm doing right now. So what I want to do is kind of open the floodgates to more deeper conversations with people who are building really interesting things and actually aren't worried about the inhibitions of talking about their journeys in an honest and transparent way. We will cover random anecdotes of things that you won't hear anywhere else. We'll talk about the good, the bad, the ugly, and ask the questions that you won't hear answered anywhere else. That will also give you an opportunity to ask those questions at the end as well. So make sure you're thinking about that as time goes on, and we'll kick off. General functionality of the app, though, before I let Don tell us a little bit more about the platform. If you can see the emojis, if you're on desktop at the side of your screen or on a mobile phone, they should be on your screen. Then you should be able to use those to react to things that we're saying as the conversation carries on. And you'll see the raise hand button at the bottom. Save that one till the end if you've got any questions. However, if you have any problems, feel free to use that just to call it out during the event. Or, of course, we have the chat function there just to pop something in there and ask any questions. We'll get someone to help sort those out for you. But without further ado, let's kick off. Don, welcome. Tell us about you and the company you run. And obviously that's quite easy right now because we're in it. Yeah, go for it.
Cool. Well, welcome everybody. Can we get a round of applause for Ash for organizing this? It's always nice to have that. Woo. All right, come on, Green Table. I got to get a round of applause from you for Ash.
Thanks, man. I appreciate the love. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Green Table. Appreciate it. So my name is Don. I'm the founder of Roomkey and the CEO as well. This is a company vision I started working on back in 2018. And since then, we've come quite a far way from the first line of code. And I'm a proud member of Dffrnt, formerly Yena. I've been a member for about 18 months now, and originally spoke at one of Ash's in-person meetup events back in London. And that was how we originally got connected, and our relationship's grown from there, headed in the virtual direction.
Perfect, love that. Yeah, man, it's been a while, and I honestly, people keep asking me how we know each other, and I don't actually know how we got in touch before that. But yeah, the relationship's grown since, and it's been great to watch the growth of the platform from where it was to where it is now. I was always surprised with how much you'd done pre-start, and I wondered if we could potentially dive into that as a starter for 10. We'll get into the deep stuff at some point soon, but we're in a platform that's like relatively new in the grand scheme of things, yet I'm already able to, meet with people from all different walks of life, all over the world, in a virtual space that, for me, I describe it as if the Sims did business. We can create our own characters, we can talk with people and bounce around a space in a room, and we can do it live, as you've just done, right? You're rocking a beard that I don't think I've ever seen you with. Tell us, how do you get to that point, right? Where do you even start? Let's go with the origin story. How does this become a concept to start with? And then we'll dive into how you end up building this thing. So where does the idea come from?
Yeah, can we do a quick survey just so I understand the audience? Can you give me a green thumbs up if you are currently building a startup? Okay, and give me a thumbs down if you currently are not building a startup. All right, and then give me, the people that did the thumbs down, give me a thumbs up if you have ambitions to build a startup at some point. Okay, cool. And then just one question more. The people that did the original green thumbs up that are currently building a startup, give me a thumbs up if you are currently raising anything past either a Series A or later, just so I understand the stage. Okay, cool. So I'll really focus this conversation on the first year of the business. It's now a 3-year-old company, but I'll focus in on how we started from me sitting alone in a cafe in San Francisco to how we got to me sitting up here virtually on stage. So I think the most important part of entrepreneurship for me is this concept of burning the boats and really having no other option other than either success or failure. That's something that's really, really powerful. Yeah. By the way, if you have something that you're building and you could share in the chat, that'd be great, so we could check it out as well. So this idea of burning the boats, if anyone's familiar with it, is from a book called Art of War by Sun Tzu. And essentially what it says is one of the best ways to motivate yourself is to give yourself no real other option other than success or death. It was in the context of war. And so the thought process was, if you go to invade somewhere and you burn the boats so that you can't retreat, then you really only have one way to stay alive, and that is to win the battle. That idea is something that I've really pursued in both of the companies I've started thus far in my life. And I think it's probably the most important motivator because it's driven by fear rather than driven by anything other than fear, which is a very human way to motivate yourself. So I started the company. I'll ask, do you want me to tell the story of kind of the venture fund I had before this and how that moved into
Yeah,
this, or what story arc?
let's go earlier than that, right? Because that whole analogy that you talked about there, burning the boats, that is, for want of a better phrase, sadistic as hell, right? Like, that's forced torture potentially to yourself. Where does that come from? Like, entrepreneurship is a journey. It's a ride up and down. For those who have been in it for a while and experienced it, they'll know what I'm talking about. And those who are about to go on that journey, it is one of the most rewarding things you'll ever do, regardless of how it goes. But just be prepared for those things. Where does that come from? Have you got entrepreneurship in your blood? Is it a family thing? Have you been exposed to it, or was it out of necessity? I'd be curious to figure out where that why you've decided a career that means you end up burning the boats, and then we can get into the previous kind of business that you had before.
Yeah, I would say that previous business I had to this one was really the inception point where I actually understood how important that concept is to give yourself no retreat. So it's a pretty funny story. So I was living, I'm originally from Detroit, Michigan, which is on the other side of the United States from Silicon Valley. So I knew literally not a person, no investors, no founders, no one in Silicon Valley. I had no connection there. Um, and so when I was still at university over on the other side of the country, I learned about virtual reality, and I really fell in love with this concept of the metaverse. And for anyone who's hasn't seen the metaverse in the press this month, although it's really become starting to happen kind of everywhere, But the metaverse is this idea that there will be a parallel universe built to the physical world that will be virtual, and it'll be driven by avatars, and it'll be a place where you can go to do all the things you would do in the normal world, but virtually. That concept is something that we've seen in movies, you've read about in books, but it's not really been possible from a technical perspective until very recently. So this is back in 2015, and I was online, well, going through YouTube, and there's this video called video series called Tested. What they do is they take apart different things like hardware items, and they kind of walk through how it was built. And what they were doing was taking apart the Oculus developer kit. And so I started watching this video, and they put the headset on, and next thing I knew, they were traveling around space, sitting in a cockpit. And from my perspective, that just felt like such a magical thing. Obviously, most people in the world never get a chance to, go into space and experience that. And obviously, this is not anywhere near the same. However, you could tell that they did feel, something special that you can't get from a traditional computer screen, and that really sparked my interest. So that was 2015. What I started doing then was really just falling in love with VR as a technology. To me, VR was one of the most important things because it's essentially a teleportation machine, where you can feel present in a different location. And so I started reading a book called Infinite Reality by Jim Blackovic, I think is his last name. And the book talked about not just the fun applications of VR in the metaverse, but it talked about how it actually makes an impact. And then it noted different studies. So for example, if you have a phobia, for example, arachnophobia, where you're afraid of spiders, one of the things that VR can help you with is exposure therapy. They can put you into that situation, have a virtual spider come to you, and over time, as you put more spiders into the world, your own brain's ability to actually become less scared from those objects increases. And that studied with multiple different phobias. They've used VR in the pain when someone has burns, like severe burns on their arms, and they're unwrapping their band-aids on a daily basis to get ones on. They'll put them in a headset inside of a snow world, and that actually cools their internal body temperature down. So I started reading this, and I thought, wow, this is like actually very powerful technology. It quite literally has the ability to change the way that your brain is processing information, and the information you present in these headsets really does make a significant impact on how you think. Another study is they put 8-year-olds in a headset underwater, and these 8-year-olds thought and they swore that they actually just went swimming. So I started really diving headfirst into this, and really loving it in 2015. But again, I had no connections to Silicon Valley, and so I didn't really know what to do. So this, I think, is relevant to all of you because every great company, or every great story, or every entrepreneur you read about, there's some moment where they have no real resources and make something out of nothing. I think that is like the number one skill within any startup. The ability for somebody to come up with an idea, and then not just have the idea, but to really push that through the finish line is so difficult. No matter what the idea is, no matter what the business is, and no matter the role, it's so difficult to go from idea to actually having something. Um, and so this was the way that I did that. I knew I loved VR. I didn't exactly know what company I wanted to start, but I knew I wanted to be involved in VR. And so my thought process was, well, probably I'm more likely to learn about the industry and figure out what company I want to start if I'm working with a number of different companies in the space. And the best industry to do that is venture capital, which is a hard business to get into. So what I started doing was I would go and cold email, and I cannot emphasize enough the tool of cold emails and how important that is. Get a LinkedIn premium account, send those in-mail messages, make sure you fill up all of the messages that you have, send cold emails. You'll be shocked who would respond. So I started sending cold emails to VR founders in 2015 after I fell in love, and people were responding saying, yeah, we'd love your help with fundraising. Please let us know, the different VCs that you might introduce us to. And so what I would do is I would then ask for their deck, and I knew no VCs. So I would take a deck from a VR startup, And then I would go look online for VC's emails, and I would send a bunch of them a cold message, and I would say, hey, I know this founder, and they're interested to raise a round. They'd love to talk to you. Can I maybe make the introduction? And so from having no network on either side of either VR founders or investors, I was able to immediately start to meet people because I was offering value. So I figured out a way that having no resources and no network, I could put effort in to actually get something started. And so I just started doing that for months, sending cold messages, asking for decks, and sending cold messages to VCs, asking to introduce them. I did hundreds, or what felt like hundreds at least, of introductions to different investors and founders throughout that time, and never had any economics in it. Nobody paid me a dollar. It was strictly just because I wanted to figure out how I could build a career in the space, and that was the best way to do it. So once I started doing that, I built out a little bit of a network, enough of a network that I was able to move to San Francisco and get an internship. And the internship was at a film studio that was doing VR in San Francisco. It wasn't really what I wanted. Personally, I'm not that interested in creating films. I was more interested in the metaverse and the social applications of VR. And so when I made it out to San Francisco, I was making very little money as an intern, not enough to actually afford to live in an apartment. And so what I started doing was couch surfing. And so I slept on 24 or something couches over the course of the first 6 months when I was in San Francisco. It was me, it was my carry-on luggage, and it was the computer. And that was amazing because a lot of the people that I slept on the couches of were not always people I found on a couch surfing website or through friends of friends. They ended up being people I was working for. So I actually met a founder of a venture fund. It was a $15 million venture fund. He was 27, so really someone I wanted to become like. And when I met him, I showed him the picture of all the couches that I had slept on, because I would take a picture of each couch just because I knew at some point that would come in handy. And he looked at it, started cracking up, and he looked me in the eyes and he said, all right, I'll let you work with me. I'll teach you how to start a venture fund. I will not pay you, but I'll let you sleep on my couch and you can learn the ins and outs and how to run a fund. And that was really kind of the inception point. And so, again, I just, that idea of, if you haven't yet started, it is not an easy next 12 months of your life. They are not going to be easy. But the way you need to think about it is that this is something that, there's no turning back once you really commit to doing something. And so the harder a position you can put yourself in to force yourself out of it, the more important. So if I take that story full circle about burning the boats, I moved to San Francisco knowing nobody. I had no income, and when I moved there, I had no place to stay. The first few days, I was staying in a hostel, like in a bunk bed with 8 other people. So that's why I believe in burning the boats, because had I not done that impulsively and just moved there with no plan and no other plan of action other than I'm not going to not make this work, there's no way I would have been able to push through all of that. So that is where I learned that, Ash, and it is, to me, the thing that I've now applied to basically everything I've done, that I take really seriously since then.
Absolutely love that. I mean, you've basically kind of just given me 14 segues here to continue the conversation, and touched on things that I've written down as questions I wanted to ask you anyway. But I think the first observation there is that, there's always a question in events like this, with speakers on the stage, around privilege, right? It's always where there's an opportunity. There's the opportunity to start a business, which isn't something that everybody has, but you've obviously kind of been able to ground that in the fact that, you just weren't even earning enough to be able to afford somewhere to live. And that couch surfing story is really heartwarming, right? It really helps kind of humanize the approach. You've done those things, and I imagine that someone who's managing a $15 million fund had probably quite a nice couch. So you definitely traded up there. Hopefully we're a little bit beyond that now. And I guess that brings me to before we dive into some of the deeper questions that came out of that, just figuring out where we're at today. So obviously we're sat in this virtual room, which is part of Roomkey now, the software that you've ended up building from that original origin story there. How do you go from that to where you're at right now, and what does that leap look like? Yeah.
So it's interesting because you can really draw a direct line from me here today to when I first saw that VR YouTube video. Everything's just kind of built on itself and evolved, and it's really all been because of the network. So I don't think this is the perfect strategy for everybody. I think it depends kind of what are your own superpowers and your skill sets and what you're comfortable with. But for me personally, the thing that I excel at is building a network and maintaining those relationships with people over time. Really, really great relationships. People that I genuinely think are friends that I've built at scale over the last 6 years. That's the thing that's really come from back then when I was doing to today, and hopefully those people will work with me for 20 years to come. So to talk a little bit about that, when I was living on these couches and working for this fund, one of the things I identified as a weak spot in my own ability to build a career was that network. I really, I had sent a bunch of these cold messages. I had built out what I could, but I didn't really have a strong way to actually get interesting people in the room. And so because I was with this venture fund, I was able to leverage their brand and host events for them. So I went into his office and I asked, hey, can I start to host events for VR within the fund's office space? And that was how I started hosting my first meetup events. So that was the middle-ish of 2015, middle to late of 2015, when I first hosted my meetup events. And I hosted those events once a month for almost 3 years. Those events really led to everything. When I was it was October 2015, I was hosting an event, a pitch event for VR. And one of the guys in the audience had come up to me afterwards and given me his card and said he really enjoyed what I was saying on stage and he'd like to sit down. And this guy ended up being an entrepreneur who had taken a company public in the 90s. He had sold it at that point for $2 billion, and then since then had started all of these different companies and sold them successfully. The company he sold for $2 billion was Flycast. He started a company called Adify, which sold for $300 million, and then he was the founding investor in a company called Flickster, which sold for 80. And so when he and I sat down for lunch after this event, it was perfect match made in heaven, because I told him, hey, Larry, look, I want to start a venture fund for virtual reality. I know I can find the best companies. I just don't have any money to invest. And then from his perspective, he said something along the lines of, look, I have all the money in the world, but I don't know anything about VR other than it's an interesting space I need to be putting capital towards. So that was directly from one of those events I hosted, the ability to raise funding and get a fund started. So he was my first investor. And then over the course of the next 3 years, thank you. Over the course of the next 2, 3 years, we continued to raise capital and continued to host these events. And it became such an ingrained kind of double, like DNA, two helixes within me. So in the one helix, I had virtual reality startups that I was talking to every day, 5 of them a day, learning about what they were doing, testing products, seeing all these cool things. In the other helix, I was hosting events and meetup events and networking events. And so between those two things, after a few years of doing that, it became pretty obvious that there was a real opportunity to take what I understood about the metaverse and VR and combine that with what I understood about these networking events. And so that was 2018. And that was the original inception of this company that we're all sitting in, Roomkey. That was the original idea. So it actually, Ash, it came directly from running a fund and hosting my meetup events for that fund that this idea then came about. And once this idea came about, it was one of those things where it was like, it came to me very opaque and not clear, but there was something there. And I spent almost probably a full year while I was running the fund. I spent a full year just like thinking about this in the shower and like making pitch decks, mock pitch decks and all these things. And then finally in 2018, I was able to get it going and we incorporated.
Yeah, I mean, it's sometimes hard to pull the trigger, right? When I've definitely been a victim of it myself, where you sit there thinking about the idea so much that you then start to see people actually start to execute on the idea that you had, and you kind of delay it. So I'm glad that those thoughts didn't just stay in the shower and we're able to be here today. I can definitely attest to Don's kind of thoughts around building a network and augmenting that out of running events, because of course that's literally why we're here today. Dffrnt was born in exactly that way, running physical meetups and trying to build a network from absolutely nothing, and then turning into opportunities that present themselves through building connection. But I would say I back myself on being able to network and do cold outreach, but there's only a couple of people that I would humble bragging here, but only a couple of people that I would say that do it better than me, and Don's certainly one of them. And there's a very good example of this being a real thing. So going away from the business chat for a second, I just wanted to find out about one of the more hilarious anecdotes that Don has told me over the years. Now, for those of you who don't know him personally, he's a character. I think the last video call we had, I jumped on and he was wearing a bathrobe and eating a bagel with a hat on. There's never a dull moment. And I just wanted to ask this question. So for anybody who hasn't figured out at the moment, you can highlight people's avatars here on the platform. And above their heads, you can see their picture. If they're not muted. Don's not muted. Don is currently muted, but when he's not muted, you can see that he's stood there with quite a famous person, and that famous person is Warren Buffett, one of the richest people in the world. I think he regularly trades places with other people. The story of how you met him, I think, is the same story that you've told me, and I'd be curious if you would be okay telling everybody else it, because I absolutely died laughing when you told me this story that involved meeting random people at a hockey game, I think it was, and ending up on somebody's plane. Can you tell us that story?
Yeah, more than happy to share that. Before I share that though, I just want to see if there's any questions from the audience, more around the entrepreneur side of things. I just want to make sure that I'm answering any questions anyone might have. So the way that you can raise your hand is by holding down this little raise hand button in your bottom menu. If you have a question, just do that and I'll call on you right now. Otherwise, I'll jump into the story right after. All right,
Bearing in mind, we'll cover more business stuff as well in a bit too. So any questions anybody's too shy to ask, hopefully I'll cover those also. But yeah, as Don said, just pop your hand up if anybody has any questions at any point.
Cool, I see one. I'm gonna invite you up. Ibra, I'm gonna invite you up here on stage so that you can be heard by everybody. Hey, welcome. Let's give a round of applause, everybody, for Ibra. Brave enough to come up on stage.
Thanks. Well, I didn't know that was part of the deal, so but I'm here. So yeah, just a quick question for me. It's just so you mentioned the analogy of burning the boat, which I think is really relevant. But I'm just really wondering, how do you maintain that pressure so that you keep innovating constantly? Because I think one of the things that I noticed is that it's easier at the beginning when you feel like you need to achieve something. But how do you maintain it, and how do you make sure you reach kind of those goals?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's really a question about this concept of people get really excited with new ideas, and then as the reality hits in, I think a lot of people lose momentum because that's when the real tough part happens. So I took it. It's so hard. I would say last year, in December period, I had to let go of of almost 40% of the company. And it was probably the lowest moment of my life, I would say, thus far, at least definitely in my career, my lowest moment. Those types of things, it's just like there's no preparation for. Another example, in December 2019, we had basically nearly run out of cash. And I called our current investors, and I was able to raise a little bit more money to get us an extra 4 months of time. And so that was a really tough December. Finally we raised a little bit more money, like literally just enough to continue. And then March 2020 came around, and there was the pandemic, and then an influx of demand type of a product. And so those are two examples that were really hard, wondering about payroll and having to let people go a year later, whatever that was. There's only one way to really do it, which is just recognize that every great company goes through these types of things. It's really rare that a company just releases a product and then next thing you know, they're an overnight sensation. That's happened with like Facebook. But a lot of the other companies that exist, have had a non-linear path to success. One of the best examples is Slack. I don't know if anybody knows the founding story of Slack, but Stuart Butterfield is the founder there. He was originally building actually a video game. And when they were building the video game, the team was remote and they needed a way to communicate with each other. And so they built their own little messaging system. The video game was not working. They ended up giving investors capital back. And a few of the investors said, you can keep the money and just, work on something else. We don't want it back because there's so little remaining. And when they let go of 30 of the 35 people in the company, and they were thinking about, okay, what do we do with the remainder of this money? What business do we start? And when they looked at around, they said, well, whatever business we start, we're going to make sure that we're using it, that chat thing that we built last time, because that was really great. And that then turned into Slack, and it became its own product. And they ended up becoming one of the fastest growing companies ever. Twitter is the same way. Twitter started as Odeo, and Odeo is a podcasting network. It wasn't really working, so they said, okay, on a Friday, after go home for the week, pair up with people, come up with ideas, come back in the office Monday and tell us your ideas. And then Biz Stone and I think it was Jack Dorsey came into the office on Monday, and they sat down with Evan Williams, and they said, here's our idea. It's this like AIM status date, 140 characters done through text, and that became Twitter. So the reason why I mentioned my story and these stories is because I think one of the most important parts is like knowing that you're not going to contain that excitement. You're not always going to be that happy about what you're doing. And the real examples of success are the examples that recognize that's happening, and then they continued forward somehow, and maybe in a totally different vehicle. So I don't think it's about maintaining that excitement. I think it's about knowing it's not going to be maintained, and it's a thing you're doing for the purpose of building a company that's successful, that impacts users and people and makes you money. So I wish there was a better answer to it, but I don't think there's really a hack. I think it's just you got to be mentally ready for the carnage that might happen.
Yeah, that's a great answer, actually, to be honest.
I'd probably add to that, actually, and probably pick up on something that is almost definitely clear to me with you, Don, and a bunch of other people that you've spoken about there, is that like lots of people are driven by, and a business doesn't have to be built on purpose, right? You can just build a product that solves a small problem. I don't know, like a like a plug for a sink. You know, that person probably isn't incredibly passionate about leaks and trying to solve that problem for the world. But there are some opportunities that do make you really, really passionate. And so even in the bad days, it's that purpose and that reason that you get out of bed for, regardless of what the day is like, because you know at the end of the day you're making somebody's life easier. And you know, without trying to do a shameless plug here, it's exactly why I end up doing Dffrnt, right? It's been a story of ups and downs over the last 5+ years, months where, you know, we always ran out of money, but the reason we're still here and the reason I'm still doing it is because it's always starts with trying to help people build the thing that they want to see in the world, and that's the reason I exist now. So yeah, even when it's not exciting, you still have that purpose to drive you. So you know, there's a bunch of people in the chat saying their businesses are around education. I'm sure they feel the same. They probably exist to try and help people learn more, and that's why they get out of bed every day. So yeah, all of the things you said, and I guess, you know, observing that in you, you're clearly incredibly passionate about this vision for the future that involves VR, and I'll dive into more on the Metaverse in a second. But that's, you know, regardless of what happens in the business, it's just making sure that the world looks the way that you think it should look in the time that you think it should look at it in. So yeah, fantastic question and a great answer there, Don. But thanks, Ibra, for popping up on stage.
No worries. Thanks.
Anyway, or any. Yeah,
I'm gonna cliffhanger
the
the question about Warren Buffett. By the way, I'm going to push that back because you mentioned another name there that I'd love to know a little bit more about that leads into the business side of things a bit more. You know, Roomkey has raised a substantial amount of money right now, up to date, and you've done it in an interesting way, a way that you've told me that, you know, even as someone who's exposed to startups, has heard most of the time people go out, raise a chunk of money, and that's it. But you've done it in more of a rolling capacity. I wonder if you can kind of dig into that. And one of the names you mentioned there is one of the names that I believe is now on your cap table in the form of Biz Stone. How does someone go around and about getting the co-founder of one of the most active apps on my phone, certainly, and probably the phone of many others in the world? How does someone get somebody like that as an investor? I'd love to get a bit of an update on where the company's at from a funding point of view, and your strategy as to how you get in that man's inbox.
Hey, Ibra, my revoke stage access button is not working. Can you hop off the stage for us just while we do this?
I think it's good.
Okay. So just first things first, because I just saw that there is some chat. I want to make sure that I'm going through that. So it looks, to your point, Ash, there is, we have end-to-end accounting for startups from Arnaud. We have improving candidate experience from Benjamin when hiring. And then Chris and Caroline, it looks like, are both working within areas that help young people that are, you know, need to be educated about things they can do to make an impact. We definitely have seen a lot of use with our product for this idea of educating. We have a school called Think Global, which is using us for their morning announcements on Mondays. So all the students get together in this room, they sit at the table, the principal goes on stage and does announcements, and then everyone's able to hang out and chat at their private tables, kind of like a lunchroom back in the day. We have people that do classes in here. This screen behind me can actually have a shared screen from your computer. So if Chris or Caroline, if you two need any help with any sort of events or anything, let me know after as well. A lot going on with an education. So Ash, yes, we have some great investors on the cap table, and because you know, this idea of how the company going and started, I think that it's really important to talk about not the people that, you know, have invested recently, because that's years into the company, but initially how things started out getting going. So I started the company, I think it was August 2018 is when we incorporated the business. And at that point, we had not raised any money, and it was just myself. And this goes to the power of what I was saying earlier of the importance of a network. So one of the funds that I had built a really good relationship with, again, it was from ground up, just building relationships. But I had built a really good relationship with this fund called General Catalyst, which is out in San Francisco. And when so when I was starting the company, because of that relationship, I knew that was a high probability chance that we could probably raise the initial startup capital from them. And so what I ended up doing was knowing what VCs look for. They really love to see quality going after markets. That's if you choose to raise venture, which by the way is a very serious decision. You should do not raise money if you don't need to. If you can build the product yourself and do it through revenue, do that without raising money. But this was a situation where I have no idea how to build what we're sitting in currently. It's so complex, and I needed to raise money and find the right team. So I went around, I actually not hired, but I contracted a headhunter and said that I would give him 10% of the first year's salary of my co-founder if he could help me find a co-founder that could build this company for us. And so it was no money down, only works if there's a success fee and only works if that person is hired. And my thought process was there's no downside to this because I'm going to get a bunch of great candidates. And the only way I pay out money is if we hire him. And the only way if hire him or her, but it turned out to be him, his name's John. But the only way if we hire John or if we are able to raise more money to then actually fund that hire. So really, the thought process was this headhunter is only going to be able to be paid if we end up having a co-founder and raising money. And that is totally worth 10% to me because it's all success-based. So he introduced me to like maybe 20 or 30 people. And they were all over the world. We had people in New York, we had people in California, we had people in London, we had someone in Tokyo, and really I just went around and I did all of these different, essentially, networking sessions, one-on-one sessions with a bunch of people, and tried to understand who's able to build a product like this and really from first principles understands what we're trying to do here. And John was the person who ended up being really the perfect fit for what I was looking for from a founder. And I think this is a super important phase that you all will be going through is choosing your early co-founder and your early team. It's so important to really find the right person that aligns with the mission of what you're trying to do. And when I sat down with John, he pulled up a video of himself on a panel at a VR event, and he said, "Watch this." And I watched it, and it was essentially him describing this idea of the next evolution of Zoom, both for events and for meetings in VR. And so when I finished watching it, he looked at me and kind of jokingly said, "If we're not going to build it together, then I'm going to build it alone." And so to me, it was just like the perfect fit, the perfect match. And so I was able to go back to San Francisco with John and pitch General Catalyst, which is the fund I had built a strong connection with. And we're able to raise some funding, get him to have enough salary to be able to quit his job, and then also have enough money for me to pay the hunter who helped me get that whole thing going. So that's a scenario where I had some inherent advantages that I built over the years because I was in venture, that I had those connections. So I think it's never too early to start building investor relationships. The best way to get money is to have a predetermined relationship with somebody that likes you, trusts you, and wants you to do well in life. And a lot of the times those relationships kind of fundamentally can't be built when you're looking for money. They have to be built when you're in the learning phase. And so I would suggest to everybody right now, if you are interested to, at some point in your career, raise venture capital or raise any sort of money for something you want to do not, please, please, please do not wait to start sending those cold messages and meeting people. People love to help out. If your message to somebody just says, "Hey, I've not yet built a company, but I'm really interested in this space and I have a few ideas. I'm not at all raising money, but I'm just looking to get things going." That's something that a lot of great investors and angel investors will respond to because the job is to help people and find value. And then for the people that gave me the green thumbs up that are currently building a company, but not yet at the Series A, and the same advice goes for all of you. Start to build those relationships now, with venture capitalists. And if cold emailing is not your style, you can go to virtual events. We have a Metaverse event that's happening in an hour or so from now, and I'm bringing a bunch of investors there. And then the person on stage started a fund in New York called DataWorks Ventures. It's a public event, and come to these types of events and network and meet people. It's the best way to do it besides cold emailing, is going to events and networking. So anyway, please don't wait to start building those relationships. It's so important if that's the route you want to go. And I was lucky enough to have kind of accidentally built those relationships beforehand. And so now, Ash, to get to the biz thing. So that was 2018. I raised funding from General Catalyst, but this idea was just not going to really attract anybody in 2018, 2019, because it wasn't built, and it was a pretty stupid sounding idea, to be honest. And so without a demo and without real proof, it was really hard to raise funding. So I was never able to actually raise like a formal round, a seed round, or something with a label. What I did was every month or so, every 2 months, I kept fundraising, and I would take on any sort of amount of money that was able to keep the business going. So we did a crowdfunding campaign for non-accredited investors, where people were able to invest as $25 into our company. And I took a long time to set that up. So we took on money that were literally $25 at a time from 1,600 people through that crowdfunding campaign. We took on $5,000 investments from people, just really never saying no to anything, and just always trying to raise any sort of money I could to keep it going. That was the mindset. So to date, we've raised $5.3 million US in total, and our largest investor is the guy who started Twitter. His name's Biz Stone, as well as 2 other venture funds, Spark Capital and General Catalyst. But none of that, that 5.3 million did not come in a chunk. It came in through, as you had heard, taking $25 at a time. And you'd be surprised how much that actually adds up if you just have this mindset that, money is money, and you need anything you can to keep fueling the business. But again, where everyone in the crowd is at within your company, I would take as much time to slow to commit to raising venture. Try to do it through revenue as long as possible. If you have to raise venture, then make sure that when you're cash poor and you need the cash, that's not when you start to build those relationships. Been happening for a while.
I think that kind of touches on, one, those are some incredible names to add to that cap table, but it's something that we can learn from, not only as people that might be raising investment, but also as people building a business, that the ability to, I think the way you described it to me before is almost like a doubling game. So the ability to, raise X amount of money once you've got an equivalent amount of money is far easier. It's hard to raise 100 grand when you've got nothing, but if you've got 50 grand, it's much easier to go and get somebody to give you another 50 grand. And if you've got 10, it's easier to get 10 off of somebody. So once you've done that and you've got 20, double that to 40 and double it to 80. And you do that a couple of times and you're at the number that you need. And that doesn't have to, relate just to raising capital. It can be customers too. Sat here for a while with, 250 paid members, which I'm chuffed at. Day one me would be so shocked at that. But having an inquiry organically come in the other day for another 250, there's the opportunity to double our membership. And when we're at 500, it will be not unreasonable to double again to 1,000 and so on and so on. And the reality is that that's just, human psychology, right? It's proof of life. You're at a certain point, so therefore it's easier for people to believe that you should be at the next point. So really good insights there. The cold messaging thing, and I know I've got people on tenterhooks with this story because it is the most funny thing I've heard in a long time of how you met Mr. Buffett, but that started with a cold email, right? It started with a cold meeting with somebody that's pretty pivotal in, I think you said your origin city. I would love to kind of get some insight on how that all went down.
Yeah. So again, I can't emphasize the importance of cold emails, and really learning those cold emails well is something that's really important. The mindset that I would try to take is, uh, if let's say you're selling a rock, you need to look for the people that need the rock. So that doesn't mean that you go message a bunch of construction companies because you think that they need to build a house with your rock. It means that you do, a lot of research and you understand, okay, maybe it's actually a paper company that needs paperweights, right? And they could use our product in that way. So for me, the cold email starts way before you actually type the email. It's in a lot of the preparation, and just knowing that, hey, this person is someone that would be the right fit for me if they do happen to read this. That is the most important thing. So I at that point I was still running the venture fund. It's 2017, and we were fundraising for our next amount of money. And there's a guy. I'm originally from Detroit, as I mentioned. There's a guy out in Detroit named Dan Gilbert, and Dan Gilbert is a self-made deca billionaire. This company's worth tens of billions, and he started it and built it through revenue. So one of a kind. And he had been doing a lot of business in Detroit, and I had just been reading about him in the papers. He also was an investor in 3 different venture funds, and I had met those venture funds over the years, and again had met them and kept some sort of relationship with them. And so what I did was I emailed the 3 venture funds that he was an investor of, and I said, hey, I'd really like to potentially get Dan Gilbert to invest into our fund as someone, who has money and interest in this space. Do you think that if I sent you a email, could you forward it to him at 4 o'clock today? And so I sent the same email to all 3 of these fund managers, asking if they would all forward along my message at 4 o'clock. And they all said yes. So what I did was I put on a VR headset and I wrote a rap, and I turned on my webcam and I did this rap in a VR headset. And I don't remember the full thing, but it was like,
Do you remember it and
to
can you do
do
it?
it was no,
Do
it was
it.
like it was like uh, uh, it was like 15 minutes is all I need to do what I've done. I had to cry, sweat, bleed, something like that. So it was a minute
Love
30
it.
of me doing this rap in a headset, and everyone forwarded to him at 4 o'clock. And I got an email right after from his assistant saying, "Hey, Dan saw your rap. He really liked it. He'd be willing to give you more than the 15 minutes you asked for. He'll actually meet you for 30. Can you fly out tomorrow to meet him?" So I said, yes, absolutely. I will fly out. Just tell me what time we're meeting and I'll be there. So the meeting was scheduled for midday, like noon. So I fly to Detroit, and I sleep at my parents' house that night. I wake up, I drive into Dan's office, and it's now our time when the meeting's supposed to start, and he's nowhere to be seen. And this guy's busy, so I don't fault him at all. Like, this guy's got way more important things to do. So an hour passed and it wasn't there. 2 hours passed, wasn't there. 3 hours passed. I'm still sitting there. And at this point, I'm like, all right, this was probably stupid that I bought this plane ticket. I don't think he's gonna meet with me. Um, Finally, his assistant came out and she said, "Hey, Don, come into the room. Dan's gonna be in there in 5 minutes. He's just preparing for the meeting, and come in and say hi to you." So I walked into the room and I sat down, and sure enough, he walks in, and right away we just hit it off immediately. There's certain people that you say the right thing early on, and it kind of triggers something. I had said something that happened to be related to his childhood, and so within like the first minute he was talking about his upbringing and his mom, and that was obviously very cool to hear. So we talked for 6 minutes, and after 6 minutes his assistant knocks on the door, comes in, and she says, "Hey, Dan, you need to leave. Sorry." And then he said to me, or he said to her, I'm really enjoying this conversation. Like, give me another 5 minutes." And she said, "No, no, no, Dan, like, you have to go right now." With zero context, he looks at me and he goes, "Do you want to come meet Warren Buffett with me?" I was like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, yeah, yes or no?" I was like, "Yes, yes, yes." And that was it. So doesn't say anything other than that. Just I say yes. He stands up. We start following him. And this guy's a power player. So when he's walking around his office and like about to leave, people are like emerging from their offices to follow him. You know, he's got his crew of 14 that he travels everywhere with. So like literally as we turn a corner, someone would come out of an office carrying a bunch of papers. They'd like give it to him and they'd like brief him, and then they would, you know, follow him to the elevator. And so it was really fascinating. Anyway, so I was a part of this at the time it was 15 people that were walking, and we get down to the basement, and there's these three black SUVs that pull up, and they have all black, you know, bulletproof windows, the little Wi-Fi spinning thing up top, the whole 9 yards. And Dan turns to me and he goes, "All right, get in the last one." So I get in the last car, and uh, long story, there was one extra person, obviously, because they invited me last minute, and so he actually asked somebody not to come on this trip because I was there. So that was kind of awkward for me at first when I was sitting in the car, because it was apparent that I had you know replaced somebody. So I was pretty like shy to really ask what was happening, and I didn't really know what was happening at this point. The only context I had was, "Hey, you're going to meet Warren Buffett." And the person I was sitting next to, her name was Sue Decker. She was the former CFO of Yahoo, and it was just people like that in these three cars. So finally, after like 20 minutes, I get the nerve to ask, "Hey, where are we going?" And as I'm saying this, we're pulling onto a private airplane hangar, and there's these three cars pull up to this jet, and we get out of this car. And again, this is from an email I sent the day before of me in a headset rapping. Like this was not expected, and I did not know what was going on. So we get on this plane, that we're flying to Cleveland. Dan owns a sports team called the Cleveland Cavaliers, which is a basketball team that LeBron James used to play for. And so he goes, we're going to Cleveland. We get in the plane, we take off, we land in Cleveland, and there's like maybe five of us in this room where Dan has it's like a private room because he owns the stadium. And sure enough, in walks Warren Buffett, and I'm like speechless at this point. I don't know what's happening. I was supposed to have dinner with my parents, so I'm texting my dad like as I'm getting on the plane. I don't think I'm going to be home for dinner. I don't know what's happening. I'm safe. Don't worry. Um, anyway, so I get a chance to meet Warren Buffett. I tell him about the fund, the things I'm doing, and it ends up being that him and Dan do an hour-long conversation for the VIP people that are funding the stadium and funding the team. And so there was like maybe 50 people in the room. I got front row. I got to be in the room with Buffett. I got advice directly from him. Just really cool stuff. And then they gave me floor seats, and so I was able to go sit down where the players are and watch the whole game. And then after it ended, we ate some food and then got back on the plane. And my whole mission, right, was to raise money. So as cool as the story was, it didn't really matter to me unless I was going to be able to somehow raise money, because that's what I needed. And so we got back in the plane, and I'm sitting there like, okay, this is like my chance. Like everyone's had a good time. We won the game. I'm gonna like talk to him. I'm gonna get some money. So we take off, and I've never been on a private plane before, but this one, you're sitting sideways rather than facing the front of the plane. You're facing the wings, and I'm not really good with roller coasters. So we took off, and I'm like, all right, I'm gonna like go raise money. And sure enough, within like 5-10 minutes, I start getting really sick in my stomach. And and so, anyways, I end up going to the bathroom. I'm throwing up. Everyone on the plane can hear me throwing up. Like I'm really really sick at this point, and I'm like throwing up in my shirt. And this is a pretty big moment for me that I'm messing up. And anyway, so that we finally land. I'm in the bathroom the entire time. I'm in the bathroom while we're landing. I'm that sick. And as I'm walking off the plane, Dan grabs my arm and he's like, "Hey, really enjoyed today. Like, nice to meet you. I'll have my people talk to your people, and we'll go from there." And then they ended up investing through the fund, and then they've also invested through one of his other funds into this company. So that whole story of, you know, meeting him, raising money, doing this whole adventure, talking to Buffett, happened from nothing more than me having a creative cold email and being willing to send it. And I've sent those same types of emails to Mark Cuban, to a ton of different people, and I've never gotten a response. But the one I did has paid dividends for years. And so again, I think, emphasizing this idea of cold emailing, it really is amazing what can happen. Whether you sleep on a couch, or you're looking to meet Warren Buffett, or you're looking to raise money, or you're looking to find a co-founder, or whatever it is, it's really one of the best ways that I think you can reach out to people that most people overlook, because it is a lot of work and it's a lot of rejection, a lot of rejection.
So I hope people realize why I made you tell that story now, just because I'm literally dying here, just like the second time I've heard it, and it never stops being funny, and just insane. You also, I realize you need to add an emoji. I'm so sorry for asking this of the team, but there needs to be a mind blown react on here as well, because that's just happening constantly with that whole story. Clearly,
our number one request is make it rain emojis.
Make it rain. It sounds like that might be from you potentially, but I'm going mind blown, and make it rain. If you could do the make it rain and like have it just a little emote of Leo DiCaprio's face just throwing money, that would be great. You're obsessed with cold email, clearly, and it's paid dividends, like you said. But if we all go and do it now, we're probably going to go and do different things. What's the key, right? In a short, because I've got one more kind of deep question I want to jump into before we move to just open networking, and I know you've got another event after this, so we can't keep you around for too long. So just wanted to find out, really, what's the key to a cold email? You said about being creative. Is that the key? Is it about a creative approach to it? Or is there a real strategy when it comes to sending that first message to someone you've never spoken to before?
I think it's very strategic. So nothing really happens on accident. There is always some sort of connection. And so from a cold emailing perspective, the cold email starts way before you actually send the message or write the message. So within that specific example of Dan Gilbert, I knew a few things about him just from reading in the press. Number one, I knew he loved Detroit. I'm from Detroit. So right there, I knew, okay, it's more likely that he'll respond to me than somebody who's not from Detroit. I knew he loved entrepreneurship, and he loved the idea of, entrepreneurship within Detroit. And so, again, I have similar passions for entrepreneurship, and have proof that I love entrepreneurship. And so those two things were, strong points. He had been talking about VR because at that point, the ability to sit courtside at a stadium in a headset is something that was very hot, and is something that's coming back right now. But, I knew he had experienced VR and understood it. And so for me, it wasn't like I just sent an email to someone that had a lot of money. I sent an email to someone that loved Detroit, loved helping Detroiters, loved entrepreneurship, loved helping entrepreneurs, and saw VR as something that he should be familiar with because it's going to change his business. So, those three things are reasons to email somebody, rather than if I wasn't from Detroit, I wasn't an entrepreneur, and I didn't know if he liked VR, then I'm really just shooting things into the cold. So as much as you call them cold emails, they're really like educated guesses where you'll have a list of 100 people, and then you look through the list and you say, okay, out of these 100, 60 of them might be interesting. These are the reasons why those 60 are interesting. Here's probably the top 5, and then you kind of climb that ladder from there. I'm doing this right now, actually. To give you a real life example, it's actually what I spent all day doing, was organizing a Google sheet of who I'm about to start cold emailing. So on the 27th and 28th, we're doing a press event, which will be a social entrepreneurship festival. And it's going to be, it's hosted by Biz, and it's going to be talking about the metaverse and how communities, schools, education organizations, companies, all these different things are being impacted by the ability for people to come together as avatars. And so that's on the 27th and 28th. The 27th is going to be a 40-person only invite event specifically for the press. And I don't really have any connections in the press at the current moment. So what I spent today doing was, over the last 4 months, I had every article I read that involved the word metaverse in a major publication. I had put it into an investor update. So I went and I looked at my last 4 months of investor updates. I took all those articles, I put them into a Google Doc, and then I went and found the author of each one of those articles. So right now, I know I have a leads list of these 50 or so writers that all have some interest in the metaverse and have all published at least one article about the metaverse. So that was kind of phase one today, was getting all, the list of those people together. And then phase two tomorrow is adding a column that says who can potentially introduce me. And if somebody can introduce me, that's perfect. I'll write their name. And if somebody can't introduce me, then I'll go online and look at their Twitter or their email, and I'll try to, figure out what's the right way to contact them. And I'll put all that into this list. So the list will have all the emails I can find, all the Twitter accounts I can find, or all the people that could introduce me to that mutual press connection. And then the third phase of this is actually doing the emailing and sending everything. And that's not something that I'm just doing from the ground up. I spent the last 2 weeks creating a video, creating a landing page, really building out this stuff. So to answer your question, Ash, before I ever send a cold email to the press, which is something I'll be doing, later this week, I've really spent 3 weeks, 2 weeks of preparation just to be able to send those emails, of filtering who's the best people to reach out to, making a video specifically for this event, creating a web page specifically for this event to show off to the press so they can understand what's happening, all this stuff, way before I've ever actually just gone in and sent a cold message. And so I really know probably already who's going to be the most likely to respond and be interested in this based on the research and the thing I've, the amount of effort I've put into this so far.
And that's why I asked the question, because you've obviously put an unbelievable amount of work into that. That's a job in of itself, potentially the job of the
Yeah, it's
founder.
systematized.
Yeah, huge. And that's the difference, right? Because, everybody in this room is incredibly smart, I'm sure, but there's always a risk that somebody hears something like that and goes out and flippantly sends emails to the next 100 people that they see online and just says the same thing, or engages in an autonomous LinkedIn campaign that does a digital cold call to 1,000 people and potentially burns bridges before ever creating them. So I'm glad that you were able to, give us that more deep advice around how to build that strategy. I have one final question before I hand over to the audience and we open up for networking, which is, you've mentioned the metaverse a bunch of times. Just for those of you who, that word for people on the other side of the coin is something that you might know pretty well, but for those who aren't aware of it, to bring it, I guess, to a consumer level understanding, anybody who's seen Ready Player One, the oasis that's been built in there, where you can engage in all different types of games built by all different types of people and be any kind of character, that's essentially the ultimate version, I guess, of what the metaverse is supposed to be. But I was curious, just from a nerdy point of view, really in an industry or a market sector point of view and the world's point of view, where is the metaverse now? And where does Roomkey sit within it? Does it exist really yet? If not, how far away are we? I guess I just want to know how far we are away from me sitting in my front room with a VR headset, able to go and play golf with Tiger Woods from my flat in Bristol in the UK.
The metaverse is. I'll send everyone articles afterwards because I've, like I mentioned, I've been keeping all these articles. But the metaverse, ironically enough, is right now really being fueled by crypto. Crypto is so common to virtual goods. The ability to own a virtual asset, whether it's buying a piece of virtual real estate that you can build a venue on, or it's buying avatar clothing, or selling tickets to whatever it is. This idea that virtual assets are powered by crypto is something that is really relevant. So that's been kind of the inception point in the last 2 months, really the last month of hype around the metaverse, and it's just starting to get going, in my opinion. I've been waiting 3 years for this, and I hadn't seen any signs of life up until this last month. And then within the last month, we had articles from Forbes, CNBC, Nasdaq, Wall Street Journal, you name it, they're putting the metaverse in the title. So it feels like to me this is kind of the inception point. And if you look back in history, if you take, for example, Apple and Microsoft, there was an opportunity window for people to create hardware companies for personal computers. It's no surprise that both of those companies were started within a year of each other, and that Steve and Bill are I think within what, 3 years of each other being born. So like there is a clear opportunity window for all of these different things that happen. If you look into social apps, Facebook, Twitter were really started around a pretty similar time, Snapchat included. Like they're all within the same decade, if not even closer. So for me, I feel like right now is that time. Um, it seems like the companies that have been building the metaverse are gonna have a real advantage this year, because the rest of the press is kind of waking up to the opportunity set here. So for me, I think this is the window of opportunity where we're probably going to see a few companies that emerge from this as the Facebooks, the Googles of the particular opportunity set, which is the metaverse. So we're seeing we're seeing events that are graduation parties, meetup events, live podcasts. We have a live podcast that happens every Wednesday night for the audience. Trivia nights on Friday, where you can actually go in there and participate in a trivia quiz. We have uh, a bunch of these different meetups and mixers. We have people that I'd mentioned are running their schools in here, running classes and running announcements in here. So I think the metaverse is already here. I just think it's really early. Um, but like the fact that people are doing all these things on such a fairly simple product is really cool for me to see, because this only grows. I think the question that's outstanding around the metaverse is it going to be one winner that takes all, like a Facebook, or is it going to be split up into multiple different areas? And I guess the Facebook comparison is not even fair, because really social is not only owned by Facebook anymore. Like Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok, they all have pretty strong followings and user bases. And so in a lot of ways, there wasn't just one social platform where you're hanging out with your friends. There's multiple. I think we'll see the same thing with the metaverse. I think each metaverse probably will end up being specialized for particular things. So we're moving more towards anything that involves communication verbally, that is supported with some sort of a presentation, or the ability to see something visually. So giving presentations for school, doing meetings with your team and sharing your screen, hosting these events and doing these live presentations. And then the other thing that we're really seeing a big use case for is this idea of helping them network and build a global network. So each table in here is private. And you'll notice when we do this networking, as you move between the different tables, which you can do simply just by clicking on the table, each conversation is private to the people only at your table. So if you're at the blue table, only those the blue table can hear you. Green table, only green table. So that's something that's really unique, and we're starting to see as well. So the way that I like to think about this is that we're trying to build the social metaverse, and the social metaverse will be very specific for socializing. But I don't ever see you playing golf with Tiger Woods in here. I think that will probably be in another realm. And then I think one other point is that the metaverse is not only built for VR, although VR is going to be a great way to access it. We're all in here on our phones or computers right now, and it's pretty immersive. It's avatar driven. It's very unique, and it has spatialized sound and spatialized tables. So for me, the metaverse is happening. We're one of the many players in the space. And as funding comes in this year from investors, then we're going to start to see a lot of different things happening. And that's from the top level. Fortnite just raised $1 billion to build out, quote unquote, a metaverse. Roblox just IPO'd. They're up 100 something percent since IPOing. They're doing a metaverse for children. So I think we're going to see a lot of this in the next decade. And I think a lot of the best companies probably have already started, and will be recognized in this next decade.
Yeah, the thing that I guess, really nerdy about is the glue that plugs that all together. What's the internet? If each of the universes or metaverses are a website, then I'm curious what comes in as the internet for all of those things to sit on, and how that's decentralized, hopefully, and not owned by Mr. Zuckerberg, as it were. So on that open and rhetorical question, I will leave you all to discuss that. Don, thank you so much for sharing so openly. We're going to open for questions, but we'll do that whilst we're in the room, bouncing around, because I want you all to have a chance to experience the networking side that Don was just chatting about. So a big round of applause for Don in unison if we can, then I can get a nice picture of it too. But thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. As I mentioned at the start, these events are run by Dffrnt, the company I run. I will send you an email afterwards just to tell you a little bit more about that. Don's a long-time member, and there's a couple of others in the room too, by the looks of things. If you didn't manage to catch the whole event, these are recorded, thanks to Roomkey being so awesome, and you'll be able to watch them forevermore as a member. We have 2 events that you may have missed that are both recorded and available in the community to watch too. And we'll keep doing that for the other 23 for the rest of the year that we've got going on. But yeah, for now, thank you so much. We'll see you in 2 weeks' time in the next event, where we have Gemma from Ice Gems talking about how she went from cupcakes to a massive e-commerce company, and more than that, I'm sure. But yeah, without further ado, let's get to the networking. Thanks again, Don.
Thanks, Ash. Appreciate it. And thanks everybody for coming. I really appreciate the time and for staying and listening.